Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. No, I refuse to go, I said belligerently, stamping my feet furiously. I don't want to go, Mum. It's horrible there. Granny May is super weird. I don't want to go either, said my brother Hamish, his eyes filling with tears. I hate it there, really hate it. There are monsters in the woods, and there's a ghost in the house that stands at the end of the bed watching us. I refuse to go. For goodness sake, sweethearts, said my mother. Listen to the way you're going on. You don't only both spout about as much nonsense as the water that spurts out of a whale's blowhole. Where did you get all this nonsensical stuff from? You're big boys now. You should know better. Need I remind you, Hamish, you're 12 years old, and you're 13, Alistair, she said, turning to look at me. You've grown up considerably since we were last at Granny May's house. You were there an awfully long time ago. We haven't been back since. I can't believe you remember anything at all from the time we spent there. When you were last there, you were so little. You were probably 6 years old, Alistair. You were 5, Hamish. When I was that age, let me tell you, I don't remember very much. What you think you experienced was probably all in your head. Little children are very susceptible, you know, to become impressionably caught up in the world of make-believe, with fictitious friends and strange unorthodox monsters living under your bed, so that in the middle of the night you believe it's going to grab you and gobble you up. Believe me, I know all about that. But there is a huge hairy black monster. He lives in the woods, Hamish insisted. I saw him myself. It doesn't help, of course, that old houses are notorious for making all kinds of scary noises, most especially at night. And it probably comes down to the plumbing, stuff like that. Let's just say when I was at school, many of the children would ask me if Ravenscroft was haunted. So I know why you feel unnerved about the place. And is it, I asked my mother, haunted, I mean? It has to be, because me and Hamish saw a ghost in our bedroom lots of times, standing at the end of the bed, staring at us. My mother made a face. Heavens no, it's absolutely not haunted. I grew up at Ravenscroft. Yes, I heard noises. Very uncomfortable noises, scary noises. I'm not going to deny that for a second. Banging sounds, footsteps, and that kind of thing. But nothing was ever going on there. I can assure you of that. It just goes with the territory of living in an old house. This time I was the one that made a face. What is it, Alistair? Asked my mother. She let out a grievous sigh. Oh, goodness gracious, you're making a big deal about this. So, you think it's haunted, do you? But it is, I insisted. It really is creepy. I remember seeing shadows dancing across our wall in my bedroom. I also saw the ghost of that old man. And there was a monster in the woods that would climb up the trellising and peer in at the both of us through the bay window. Mum, you have no idea how big this thing was. It was absolutely terrifying. Oh, goodness gracious me, I don't know how to take this. What are the two of you like? By the time we get to Ravenscroft, you'll have talked yourself into believing the mansion is almost certainly haunted. When I was at school, despite my best efforts to tell people that Ravenscroft was not haunted, a rumour spread like wildfire across the school that it was. Everyone believed it to be the case. So when it was my 8th birthday, none of my friends pitched up for my birthday party because they were too scared to enter the premises. I was absolutely devastated that no one turned up for that birthday of mine, because they thought the house was so creepy. All my future birthdays I had to have in the diner in town, because the power of suggestion is incredibly strong. You can believe anything you want when you put your mind to it, even if it has no bearing on the truth whatsoever. So if you both believe Ravenscroft is haunted, then for you it'll be exactly that, because every rattling noise you hear, you'll put down to being a disembodied voice or a ghost lurking around. You'll be jumping out of your skin, imagining that you are seeing things that are not actually there. I'm sure you've made up the things in your head you claim to have seen back then, like the old man standing at the end of your bed. I can assure you that whatever your fictitious imaginations conjure up, what you think you saw was not real. You were living at Ravenscroft an awfully long time ago. You were both terribly young back then. Your memories are probably rather disjointed. Yes, I do know Granny May is very unorthodox and quirky, but she's not a bad person. She was my mother for all of my life. I loved her very much. Yes, she was different to all the other mothers that picked up their children at the school gate. I will admit that. I know she didn't make many friends because she was so different to everybody else's mother. At the time, I wished she was ordinary, like my friends' mothers. But now, all these years later, I appreciate her quirkiness. Do you realize how dull this world would be if we were all exactly the same? If that were the case, the movies would be dull to watch, would they not? Granny May is a freak, Mum, chorused my little brother. Alistair's right. Granny May is a freak, and Ravenscroft is a horrible, horrible place. I hate that house. I hate that place. I don't ever want to go back there again. What if the ghost of the old man is still there, watching us when we go to bed at night? I'd rather bury myself in a hole in the ground and live in a burrow like a rabbit and eat wild parsley. At least then I'll be able to sleep peacefully at night. And I don't care what you say, Mum. There was a monster at Granny May's house, and I know he lives in the woods. He was always watching us, always, always watching us. Goodness gracious me, kids. Where did this all come from? All this distress about moving away to Ravenscroft. You're both feeding each other frenziedly, with gargantuan, paranoid and preposterous ideas that bear no resemblance to reality. If you both carry on this way, you'll end up torturing yourself with your warped, way-out, intrepid fancies. The mind is the biggest blood-sucking piranha in your lives, and that's what will ultimately eat you. Not the so-called monsters you believe are hiding out in wait for you under your bed at Ravenscroft. I thought you two had grown up significantly, and were big enough not to believe in such nonsense. Need I remind you that Granny May was my mother? I grew up with her, for goodness sake. If she was a freak, I would be the first to know about it. Yes, she's a little unconventional, and she is also misunderstood by many people, including yourselves, which is a dreadful pity as far as I'm concerned. She's a very good person, a lovely sense of humour, and a kind, generous heart. and I can promise you of that. She has a passion for the occult, but that doesn't make her a bad person. And before you get started, Alistair," she said, waving a warning finger at me, "the occult does not mean it's evil, as you automatically assume. The word occult doesn't mean the person is a devil worshipper or something like that. It means they have an interest in otherworldly things, things you cannot explain. And there is nothing wrong with that, is there?" I pulled a face. "Pastor Morris Becker says that the occult is dangerous and we shouldn't dabble with things we don't understand. Don't you remember he did a long sermon about that at church? He talked about bad things happening to people who play with those witchy kind of things that Granny May does." "Pastor Becker is right about that. I agree with him," said my mother. "I don't think it's wise to dabble with what you don't understand. But try telling that to Granny May. We cannot impose our will on my mother, can we? She is who she is. She makes the rather outlandish choices she does out of a curiosity for things she doesn't understand. So yes, she messes around with things, which isn't a very good idea. But she's not seriously caught up in the occult. She's interested in it. She plays around with quirky gadgets and things you get from those ethereal shops that sell tarot cards, dream catchers, candles, and potions. It's harmless stuff. She's not hurting anyone, is she? She just has a fascination for those things. But she's a regular person like you or me, and you forget we haven't seen her in many years, so she may have changed. People do change, you know. Look at the people who come to church, who claim they were addicted to drugs or alcohol for years and years. Some of them have been sober for a very long time. They've changed, have they not?" "I still say Granny May is wacko, Mum. I know she's your mum, and I know she's my grandmother, but that's the truth. And I'm sorry, but if she's messing around with stuff like that, well, that's crazy, because you don't know what you're doing. Pastor Morris said that people play with Ouija boards can call up demons and give them an open portal into our realm, so they're invited into our reality. That's what he told us. That's scary stuff, Mum, because demons are real. Pastor Morris says they are." "You're a sharp one there, Alistair," said my mother. "You make a very good point. I hadn't thought about it like that. But I am sure Granny May wouldn't be stupid enough to play with a Ouija board and summon up demons. She's not stupid. Curious she definitely is, but definitely not stupid. We're going to live at Ravenscroft with Granny May, whether you like it or not. We don't actually have a luxury of choice in the matter. If we did, things would be different. But I told you I cannot afford the rent on this place any longer. I don't have a job. We need Granny May's help. We can move in with her, and I will get a job in the town. And the moment I've saved enough money, we'll find our own place and move away from Ravenscroft. Until then, we're stuck there." "But I don't want to go, Mum," I begged. "Neither do I," said Hamish. "Please, Mum, please don't make us go." "Look, children, you're going whether you like it or not. I think now the two of you are older, you will see another side to Granny May, and you might be pleasantly surprised by how endearing and delightful your grandmother really is. And perhaps when you see Ravenscroft, now that you're older, you won't be so intimidated by the place." "How long will it take for you to earn enough money for us to move out of Ravenscroft?" I sighed wearily, knowing full well that my mother would never be able to procure the kind of income my father had brought into our lives. For a start, my mother had no essential work experience or skills behind her. I employed a little tact when I said to her rather dubiously, "I mean, if you get a job waitressing in town, you'll be earning pennies, won't you, Mum? It'll take absolute ages to make the kind of money that you need for us to move away. And what about school? Where will we go if we're living at Granny May's?" "We will enroll you at the local school in the area, love. There's no problem in that regard. No problem at all. I've already spoken to the headmistress of the local school, and she is delighted to accommodate you. I will do my level best to make enough money for us to move away. That's a promise. We'll make a plan somehow. Where there's a will, there's a way." I inwardly grimaced at my mother's sobering words. I knew by the sounds of things it would take a very long time before we would leave Ravenscroft. My mother would be unlikely to ever make the amount of money needed for us to depart the place, so we would be entirely dependent on Granny May's hospitality. How long would we be stuck there? My brother Hamish was absolutely right. It would be far better to burrow a hole in the ground and live there like a rabbit, eating wild parsley and garlic to get by, than put up with living at Ravenscroft. I had tried very unsuccessfully to block out the insidious memories of our time living in that bleak, oppressive old Victorian mansion, but the formidable, tormenting memories were coming back to haunt me in rather obscure, shadowy ways, almost like a face peering at you through a white veil that you can't see very clearly, but you know is there. The memories were so ambiguously vague, but I'd struggled to fight them off for so many years. But now they were being brought back into the forefront of my mind, like a high tide carrying a shoe in its spirited waves that is now being deposited very firmly on the golden beach sand. The cheerless, sombre reality of moving to Ravenscroft for the foreseeable future seemed to have awoken a sleeping giant within me that I'd hoped would remain fast asleep. But now he was slowly waking up. I even wondered if me and my brother should run away together. But what would be the point of that? It wasn't remotely practical, and we couldn't exactly fend for ourselves. What if we got into worse trouble than if we stayed at Ravenscroft? I'd heard horrifying stories of what happened to runaway kids. Some were never ever seen again. I didn't want that to be the fate for me and my brother. I had asked my best friend Douglas Hughes if his mother would take me and my brother in until my mother found a good job so that we could remain in Nevada. Douglas had thought it was a terrific idea. He was a single child who had dreamed of siblings. His mother Samantha had said she'd love to take care of us without any charge. "It would be absolutely wonderful," she told my mother. "It would be no problem at all. Indeed, you'd actually be doing me a favour, not the other way round. Douglas would so love to have 2 brothers, and your children will do very nicely. Me and my husband were never able to have any more children after my radical hysterectomy, you see. So your children living here with Douglas would be like the brothers he never had. It would be so good for my son to experience that. And your kids are welcome to stay as long as they like." "Please, Mum," I had begged. "Please may we stay with Douglas? We don't want to leave Nevada. Please can't we live with the Hughes?" "I'm sorry," my mother had said. "I'm very grateful for your kind offer, Samantha, really I am. But I'm afraid we can't accept your kind hospitality. We're moving to Ravenscroft, where my mother lives, near the Canadian border." I could see Mrs. Hughes was genuinely upset that we weren't moving in with her. She always complained that Douglas got very lonely without having siblings. He had also been very sad to lose out on potentially experiencing the benefits of what it might be like to have 2 brothers. But no one was more sorry about our state of affairs, about my mother's refusal to let us stay in Nevada with the Hughes, than me and my brother Hamish. My mother was very peeved with the both of us for going behind her back to ask Mrs. Hughes if we could move in with her. But that may give you an idea about how dead set we were about moving into Ravenscroft. "I am infuriated with the both of you. I really am. I don't know what to say. But I will say this. I know you, Alistair, were the mastermind behind this idea. I cannot believe you had the brazen gall and the audacity to ask poor Mrs. Hughes to take care of the both of you. How could you dare to impose on a stranger's hospitality like that? I'm absolutely appalled. I honestly don't know what to say. I really despair of you both sometimes. I cannot believe you had the brass nerve to do that. You put poor Mrs. Hughes in an impossible position. She knows how much her son Douglas likes the both of you. She felt loath to refuse your request." "The Hughes are not strangers, Mum," I protested. I've known them for years. They can afford to take care of both me and Hamish. They have lots of money, and Mrs. Hughes is a very nice person. She genuinely wanted us to move in with them. She thought it was a great idea. Mum, you could go and live with Granny May, and we could stay here in Nevada and live with the Hughes. She says Douglas gets very lonely being an only child. He's always wanted brothers. Samantha Hughes is a delightful lady. I agree with that, and clearly very generous too. What you say may be true, Alistair, to an extent. I know it's upsetting to leave Nevada, but I'm afraid we're sticking together as a family, and that is that. I'm sorry you're not happy about moving to Ravenscroft, but there's not a damn thing I can do about it. My mother snapped indignantly. Your father is no longer around. I've had to make some tough, unenviable decisions on our behalves. That's what you do when you're strapped for cash. I don't know why the two of you have to make this so difficult for me. Why you have to make a mountain out of a molehill about moving to Ravenscroft. I'll have you know, I don't want to go and live at Granny May's any more than you do, much as I love my mother very much. But we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, aren't we? The luxury of choice has not been afforded to us. My mother sniffed, blowing her nose very loudly in a hanky. Oh, my God! I'd seen a tear sneakily slip down my mother's burdened cheek. I had upset her. I hated making her sad. I was now gripped with the weight of my guilt, knowing full well I was the cause of her obvious disquiet, which made me feel like a prize heel. I'm so sorry, Mum, I winced apologetically. I didn't mean to upset you. Really, I didn't. It's just, moving to Ravenscroft is a big deal for the both of us. It feels like we've been thrown out of the chicken coop into the fox's den, if you know what I mean. I guess I'm scared to go back there. My memories about the place are pretty bleak. But I'm sure you're right. I'm probably blowing everything out of proportion. My mother took me gently into her arms and patted my back affectionately. None of this is easy for us, Alistair. We are going to have to make adjustments in our lives, whether we like it or not. Change can be dicey at the best of times. Believe me, I know all about that. I realise the last thing that I would like for both of you is to have to change schools and to make brand new friends. But sometimes you're forced to do what you have to do. Of course, I know how happy you've been living here in Nevada, as have I. But all over the world people get displaced from time to time, sometimes from war-torn areas. Things like that. They can't sit back and gripe about their obvious misfortune, or feel sorry for themselves, can they? They move away, facing the storms that come their way with a positive attitude, I would hope. We need to follow in their example. Your dad would not want you to be griping about things. We've lived at Ravenscroft before. We can do it again. I promise you things will settle down. And maybe you'll even enjoy living there. Let's not kid. That part of North America bordering the Canadian border and the Great Lakes, well, it doesn't get better than that from a scenic perspective. I mean, the views there are intoxicating, to say the very least. That's true, I admitted. It is a spectacular part of the world. Finally, we agree on something, Alistair, said my mother, her eyes lighting up with renewed hope, as if our new living situation wasn't as grim as we were making it out to be, and there was a light at the end of the tunnel. Was there? I privately wondered. I wasn't sure about that. My mother was right, though. We were better off than a lot of people who had to flee war-torn areas of the world to find a safe haven to live. At least we had somewhere to go, even if it was Ravenscroft. I'd seen how the homeless lived on the streets, and had always been grateful to have a roof over my head. I mean, continued my mother, think of the indigenous wildlife and the idyllic scenery there. I know how much the two of you love to explore. You and Hamish can have the time of your lives riding your mountain bikes around the place. And there's some ancient trees on Granny May's property that are spectacular for climbing. Indeed, she's got a wood grove full of them. You can climb as long as you're careful with your footing. And when I say careful, I mean, be careful. I don't want you getting too ambitious on those branches and hurting yourselves." My brother gave me a fleeting, wary but resigned glance. We privately exchanged knowing looks together, for we didn't believe for a second we'd be climbing any trees at Ravenscroft. That would be asking for trouble. It would be inviting the devil to mess with us. In a benign place, climbing trees would be harmless enough, and even fun, but not at Ravenscroft. Never at Ravenscroft. We knew there was a monster living in the woods there. We'd seen him ourselves when we were little, but we chose tactfully not to cause my mother greater anxiety. She seemed stressed enough about the move. I didn't want to make it 1,000 times worse for her by kicking up a fuss. We had done enough harm on that front already. I may have only been 13 years old at the time, but I felt the weight of responsibility to care for my mother, now that Dad was no longer around. I knew he would have wanted me to watch out for her, but at such a young age it was a heavy responsibility to undertake. I had caught my mother clandestinely crying on many occasions, when she didn't know I'd seen her. I knew she'd hit rock bottom, and was experiencing the dark night of the soul in her life. She rarely missed Dad dreadfully, and was struggling to get out of bed in the morning. Ostensibly, I knew we were the quintessential reason that my mother dragged herself out of bed every day. Otherwise she'd have gladly stayed there all day long. She would put a cheerful smile on her face that I noticed never met her eyes. She had lost a significant amount of weight since my father's passing. The gaunt, pinched look on her face did not suit her. Her cheeks were all sunken in, and she was holding up her jeans that used to fit her very well with the belt. But my mother had an appetite of a mouse now, and even when she brought her favourite key lime pie home, which she normally devoured in a single sitting, she had barely even taken a nibble out of it. When I witnessed this, I knew how heartbroken she had to be. She was taking appetite stimulants to help revive her flailing appetite, but they had failed to work. I also noticed that when my mother was not wearing any makeup, there were dark half-moons cradling the underlying areas of her eyes. I think it meant that she wasn't sleeping very well. I told my brother Hamish we needed to be extra nice to my mother. She wasn't coping well after Dad's demise. We needed to help her as much as we could with chores and stuff like that around the place, and he had wholeheartedly agreed. I could not help but surreptitiously wonder whether our family would ever recover from my father's tragic death. Somehow I doubted it, for a big light that had cemented us together as a family had been expunged from our lives, and I wondered if things could ever be the same again. I think it felt as if a big part of ourselves was now missing, like losing an arm or a leg that you become very attached to. Indeed, I'd have gladly given up a body appendage to have my father back in our lives again, but some things are just not meant to be. It was sad that our lives had done a complete 180. Why did my dad have to fortuitously die like that? We had never seen this coming. If he was still around, we wouldn't be forced to move away and go and live with Granny May at Ravenscroft, which was our worst nightmare being realised, like the sudden arrival of black mould being discovered growing randomly on your kitchen ceiling. And whether you like it or not, the problem has to be tackled, or it can get way out of hand. I liked it here in sunny Nevada. I'd grown very attached to my life here. I was a creature of habit. I liked it here, living in sunny Nevada. I was passionate about my life here. I was a creature of habit, and liked things to move with a predictable, rhythmic, well-ordered flow. Changed for me was an inconvenient, annoying disruption, which meant dipping my foot into foreign water. I hated embracing anything new. Even when my parents took me to the diner in town to eat, I would always order the same items on the menu every time, like a cheeseburger and chips and an extra-large lime milkshake. I know that sounds boring, but for me it was a safe choice. My father would encourage me to try something different, but I would point-blank refuse. I always liked to stick with what I knew. It was reassuring for me. One thing was for sure, I didn't want to move away from this part of the world that had been my beloved home for the last 6 years or so. Our house that we lived in Nevada was like so many of the other bungalows in our street, with its salmon pink veneer and very basic front yard, with its distinctive palm trees. Me and my parents and my brother Hamish had lived with Granny May for the first few years of our young lives. Then one day a miracle happened that transformed our lives for the better. My father had taken up a great position with a company in Nevada, so we were moving away. I thought all our Christmases had come at once, for I hated living at Ravenscroft with a passion, as did my brother Hamish. We had lived at Ravenscroft with my parents at the time because they weren't flush, and the job my father procured in the nearby town had paid very little and was not sufficient enough to support a growing family, so Granny May had taken us in at the time. She was generous like that, even though she was extremely unorthodox and very weird as far as I was concerned. She dabbled with the occult, fancied herself as an aspiring witch. She was always smudging her home, lighting candles, and chanting strange stuff from a book of spells that she stumbled across quite by chance in some old bookshop, and the dog-eared book had become like a Bible to her. At the time, her regular chanting would set my nerves on edge, and I don't know whether it was my imagination or not, but things always got progressively darker at Ravenscroft every time she kind of chanted one of her spells. She'd also make strange concoctions on the stovetop that she made from recipes in that book of spells that would leave behind a cocktail of rather peculiar smells in the house that were far from pleasant, to say the very least. By lucky chance, a good friend of my father's who attended university with him was living in Nevada. He offered my dad a job at the company where he worked. It was not nepotism, as you may believe, as that is the wrong, unethical way to get a job. It would seem my father's friend Samuel Evans genuinely believed my father had the perfect credentials and skills for a job at the company. It turned out Samuel was correct. My father flourished in the workplace, sailing his way effortlessly to a prominent position based on his remarkable leadership abilities. I had laid awake in my bed at Ravenscroft on many a restless night, praying to God to take us away from this God-forsaken place, where I had felt the formidable presence of the male ghost that always kept his nasty eyes pinned on me and my brother, like a farmer waiting for the perfect time for the pigs to be fattened for slaughter. We were naturally grateful to move away from Ravenscroft, of which we hoped we'd never have to visit again. I had made very good friends in Nevada. Me and my brother had grown especially close to Douglas Hughes and his family. He was like a third brother to us. We had an excellent life there, enjoying many intrepid adventures and outdoor excursions that had all left an indelible mark on our childhoods. It had never occurred to me that we would leave our Nevada home, but my mother had been told by her psychic friend, a ditzy over-the-top woman called Chloe Mombarkin, who looked like a stick insect and seemed to own a pair of compound eyes that were far too big for her face. She told my mother in no uncertain terms that in a year's time that she would not recognize her life. Never was a truer word spoken. My mother had thought Chloe Mombarkin was talking mumbo-jumbo, and had light-heartedly said very casually, "Oh, is that right?" Chloe had rolled her eyes at my mother and said, "Don't be so cynical, Flo. I'm telling you, you're leaving Nevada. You're moving away to embrace a brand new life. I can see it in the cards, as clear as day." Ostensibly in the light of recent events, Chloe Mombarkin's surprisingly accurate claims had given my mother pause for thought. "I thought she was a bit loopy," my mother told me. "But even so, I've always liked Chloe. I guess growing up with a mother like Granny May, I seem to be drawn to quirky people who were a little on the unconventional side. When Chloe said I was going to move away and start a new life, I didn't believe it for a second. Now look what's happened. She was right on the money about everything. I suppose I should have given the woman more credit. But I've never believed in all this woo-woo stuff, and I'm not about to start now. Maybe it's not so woo-woo after all. Sometimes life has a way of making the most unlikely things become tangibly real, don't you think, Alistair?" "Maybe it was a lucky guess," I suggested. "Well, I hope you're right, Alistair," my mother had said. "But you've got to admit, Chloe's accuracy is quite confounding." What my mother failed to mention was that Chloe had predicted something dark from our past was calling us away from Nevada. I don't know what it is, but it looks menacing. All I'm saying is be careful. My mother had laughed at Chloe and said, "Don't be ridiculous." But in the light of recent events, Chloe's ominous words stuck in the back of her throat, like a boulder which she tried to block out. I guess you're wondering how my father died, and that would be a reasonable question for you to ask. But I hasten to say, I really am probably as clueless as you are about it. One day my father simply went off to work, like he did every other morning of the week. I do recall it was a public holiday, but my dad was still going into the offices. A meeting had been planned to discuss the merging of the company. Two companies were becoming one. My father was in charge of this metamorphosis, so to speak. My father usually would leave for work very early in the morning, wearing a navy blue pinstripe suit that fitted him marvellously, like a glove, along with a pair of shiny black shoes that were so polished you could probably see your reflection in them. He was always immaculately attired, and gave off this air of importance that demanded respect. On this unassuming morning that felt more like a Saturday than a Friday, everyone in my father's offices was dressing casual, so my dad was wearing a white crisp cotton shirt, casually rolled up at the sleeves, a pair of blue chinos, and a snazzy pair of sneakers, with a really nifty white logo on the side, that I would have liked to have owned myself, because they were so cool. My father had kissed me on the cheek apologetically. "I'm sorry, son, that I have to go off to work this morning. I know it's a public holiday, but I'm in charge of this merger, you see. We need to discuss the trajectory of where the merger is going to ultimately take the two companies, as they become one over the course of the next year. There is a lot of adjustments to be made, and I'm the one that has to make all the major decisions in that regard." My father, who was naturally ambitious by nature, enjoyed challenges. He was very excited about this turnaround in the company, as this merger would be very good for our family, with my father's new pay packet looking like something only dreams are made of. "I'll make it up to you, I promise, both of you." Those were the last words my father ever spoke to me and my brother, on that standardly routine day that on the surface seemed like any other. Only this was a day that would end up being the biggest stumbling block in our lives, for this was a day we would never be likely to forget. I was naturally upset, very aggrieved that my father had to go off to work on a public holiday of all things. My dad would normally take me and my brother Hamish out on a special road trip or something, a wildlife sanctuary perhaps, stuff like that. But on this public holiday we were stuck at home with my mother. Don't get me wrong, I loved my mother, of course I did, but she was not as adventurous as my father was, so hanging around her could sometimes be a little dull, unless of course Douglas Hughes came around to play with us. My dad took the word exciting to a whole new unexplored level. He owned a Harley Davidson and a dirt bike, so he was cool in every sense of the word. He would take me and my brother fishing, rollerblading, skating, clay pigeon shooting, ice skating, kayaking, everything else besides. It was always fun when my father was around. He'd spoil us at diners with hamburgers and milkshakes and take us on overnight camping trips. My father did admit to feeling a little off-colour on the public holiday, but he simply put it down to being slightly apprehensive and overawed about the company's merger. But beyond that he seemed in relatively good form. My mother, however, did confide with us that a week before my dad's tragic demise, he was having insidious nightmares, and they were all about Ravenscroft, which was super weird in itself. "Fancy you're thinking about the old place," my mother had chuckled, thinking nothing of my father's strange dreams. Could he have had some kind of prognostication that our family would ultimately be returning to the formidable place? You could only but wonder. My father worked out regularly to keep his body in excellent shape. He ate an incredibly healthy diet of mainly meat and vegetables. He abandoned all products that contained sugar or preservatives, so we lightly thought he'd live forever, unlike Mr. Gromjola, who lived next door to us. Mr. Gromjola was in his early 30s, and was so big he couldn't even walk out of his front door straight. He had to turn his body at an angle, and he always struggled to fit in the front seat of his rather clapped-out maroon SUV, that had almost certainly seen better days. Mr. Gromjola's extensive stomach frequently got jammed behind the wheel of his car. My father sometimes had to help him out of his car, which must have been pretty humiliating for the poor man. Mr. Gromjola was so big that I felt sorry for him, especially since his eyes seemed to be buried beneath mounds of flesh, and I wondered if he could actually see clearly out of them, with all the obstruction of skin in the way. The unfortunate man seemed to roll everywhere, like an inflated beach ball bouncing down the promenade of the beach. He would tell us he had a very bad flailing metabolism, and that he ate nothing but lettuce and tomatoes all the time. He claimed it was nothing but a medical mystery as to why he was so obese, and even the doctors could not understand his strange predicament. I was horrified that somebody who claimed to live on rabbit food, most especially tomatoes and lettuce, could be that large. I asked my father about it, as I was genuinely perturbed about the matter. My father said that Mr. Gromjola would not be the size he was if he ate rabbit food, because that would be physically impossible. I suspect he eats a lot more than he claims he does, my father told us. Some people just don't want to admit the truth, because they feel ashamed. I suspect Mr. Gromjola is embarrassed to be the size he is. Me and my brother once sifted through Mr. Gromjola's rubbish out of curiosity, because we couldn't understand the enigmatic mystery of how he could be so big if he claimed he ate virtually nothing. So we did some investigating of our own to find out if there was any explanation to his obesity, and it turns out the evidence was all in his dustbin. We really didn't have to search terribly far. It overwhelmingly pointed out to the fact that Mr. Gromjola ate a massive amount of food. By the looks of things, he ate what a family of 4 would eat in a week in one day. I found it unfathomable that one person could consume that much. Was it any surprise he was so large? Beyond that, we often saw takeaway delivery vehicles delivering stuff to his front door. But Mr. Gromjola claimed all his deliveries were from the healthy gourmet in town. He told us he was ordering the reduced-calorie meals and plenty of salads. Me and my brother, to the contrary, did not find anything from the healthy gourmet in town. Instead, we found pizza boxes, donut boxes, and so forth. So I think Mr. Gromjola was deluding himself when he claimed to eat so very little. Of course, I did confront him once with the evidence, and he insisted the stuff we'd found in his dustbin was stuff his brother ate when he was visiting him. But I didn't believe a word of it. I was to later learn Mr. Gromjola didn't even have a brother. The overweight man did admit to being on hundreds of medications for a multitude of problems, which he told us would go away if he lost the weight he was carrying. My father kindly invited him to go to the gym with him, but Mr. Gromjola refused, saying it wouldn't do him any good, because he could barely walk up the road without getting seriously out of breath. "I'm in a very bad way, he would say, patting his stomach so sorrowfully and wheezing like an asthmatic as he tried to breathe. "I barely eat anything. Salad all the time. Tomatoes and lettuce. I never eat anything else. My heart is all stuffed up, so I have to stay at home all the time. It's the way it is, I'm afraid. The good Lord made me this way. There's nothing I can do about it. Nothing at all." "What does the doctor say about your health, Mr. Gromjola?" I asked.
"Oh, the doctors don't understand why I'm like this. They can't understand. I told them how few calories I eat every day. I'm nothing short of a medical mystery, let me tell you that."
What I'd never have expected to happen, that my father, who was a beacon of health, would just drop down dead in the way he did. If it had happened to our next-door neighbour, Mr. Gromjola, that would have been a different matter. I wouldn't have actually been that surprised, for he was tormented daily by a plethora of health problems. He was always telling us his doctor said if he didn't lose the weight, his health would be seriously compromised. He had a fatty liver, high blood pressure, blood sugar levels that were through the roof. Furthermore, he had aches and pains and very poor circulation. But my father, he was a pinnacle of health and of well-being. So why was he the one that had ended up dead? It made no sense to me at all. And at 13 years old, it made me aware that none of us are invincible, even if we do take good care of ourselves. Even the coroner could not find the cause of my father's mysterious death, and seemed rather reticent and reluctant to tell my mother that she had no idea why he died. She did, however, find a selection of handprints, all in the form of dark bruises, around my father's neck in a cluster, which was profoundly odd, because it looked like someone had tried to strangle my father, but that was not how he died. I think the coroner clearly did not like to be put in an embarrassing, awkward position like this, of being equally as stumped as the family was, as to the cause of my dad's mysterious death.
But there has to be a reason that my husband died, my mother insisted. People just don't drop down dead for no reason, surely. And what about these strange cluster of fingerprints that you found around his neck? Are you sure that had nothing to do with his death? I'm very sorry, Mrs. Sanchez. I cannot explain the bruising around your husband's neck. But unfortunately, losing a loved one like this can happen. I'm terribly sorry for your loss. It has got nothing to do with the bruising around his neck as to why he died. Sometimes in my line of business, we have cases that mystify us, even as the professionals. Your husband is one of those enigmatic cases, I'm afraid. It happens to babies too, Mrs. Sanchez, when they die for no reason at all. We call that sudden infant death syndrome in babies. Your husband's death is in much the same line as that.
Regretfully, my immediate family were given absolutely no closure in regards to my dad's very devastating death. We could not establish any logical reason or explanation for why he died, although my mother's psychic friend Chloe didn't make things any easier when she told my mother ever so nonchalantly, "I told you something was drawing you away from Nevada, did I not? But be careful about that dark energy I warned you about. As far as Kenneth is concerned, it was his time to go. We all have exit points in our lives. Your husband chose to take his. He obviously finished what he intended to accomplish here on earth." My mother didn't believe that for a single second, that my dad would willingly abandon his family and kids like this, as there were so many things he still wanted to accomplish in his life. Furthermore, he was very excited about the expansion of the company business. It was later in the morning of the public holiday, when my dad had left for work on that unfortunate day, that our lives were forever changed. Me and my brother were happily and very innocently making homemade hamburgers for lunch, with only the finest high-quality Aberdeen Angus grass-fed minced beef. My mother was mixing the hamburger patties together with chopped herbs, spices and onion. All of a sudden there was a knock at the front door. My mother's hands were heavily caked in mince.
"Talk about bad timing," she said, looking up at us from the bowl and frowning. "We aren't expecting any company, are we? You didn't invite Douglas Hughes over, did you, kids?"
"No," I said. "Douglas is away with his parents. They've gone on a camping trip." My mother speedily washed the mincemeat gunk off her hands under the kitchen sink. She wiped her hands dry on the apron that she was wearing, which she hurriedly removed from her person and hung on the hook at the back of the door.
"Just stay there, kids, will you?" she said, raising her hand like a lollipop lady at a pedestrian crossing. She was inadvertently telling us in her sign language to stay put. "I'll get that. I won't be a minute." While my mother scurried away to the front door, me and my brother Hamish glanced briefly out of the kitchen window, but something grabbed our attention. We had both noticed a police vehicle, parked on the street directly opposite our home. "It's the police!" I said to my brother in astonished confoundment. I pointed towards the police car that was parked on the pavement. "What are they doing here? They're not visiting us, are they?" Me and my brother exchanged bewildered glances together, and with curiosity ultimately getting the better of us, we quickly scrambled out of the kitchen, like two rockets in takeoff, eager to see what was going on. We stopped short in our tracks as we stood in the entrance hall, observing my mother as she pulled back the chain lock and slowly but surely opened the door. I heard the low, earnest mumble of voices
one which was very conspicuously my mother's. I heard her saying, "What is this about, officers? Has something happened?"
"Might we come in for a moment, ma'am? Have a word with you," came one of the voices.
My mother said, "But of course, follow me." She gestured for the uniformed officers to come into the house. I noticed at once that their demeanour was solemn and sullen, and so my heart began to do a series of flip-flops in my chest. I guess I could sense that something was really off, and somehow the burgers we were going to cook for lunch had lost their appeal, as a bitter taste swept across the back of my throat. On seeing us, my mother waved her hands at us. "Go back to the kitchen, kids. I'll be with you in a moment. I just need to speak to these nice officers for a second. But I won't be long, I promise you that." Me and my brother scooted away obediently, while my mother closed the living room door behind her. Then a while later, I heard her scream, "No! No! Please, God, no! This can't be true! It can't be!" My mother's words were so horrifically haunting, I felt as if someone had plunged a knife into my own guts. My blood turned as cold as ice. My body trembled and shook like a blancmange jelly. Something terrible had happened. I could feel it in every part of my being, and even my bones began to rattle. My brother looked visibly shaken after he'd heard my mother scream. It was a gut-wrenching cry that you never ever forget. I heard heavy boots trudging towards the kitchen. One of the officers came in and asked me where the stuff was to make tea for my mother. "Your mother needs a good cup of sweet tea," he said. Me and my brother said nothing as we watched the officer boil a kettle, and then finally load my mother's cup with both milk and an excess of sugar. "What happened?" I asked. "I heard Mummy screaming. Is everything all right? What's going on?" The officer smiled at us rather bashfully. "Your mother's just had a little shock, that's all. But don't worry about it. I'm sure she will tell you about it soon enough." The officer was annoyingly not very forthcoming about anything. He gave us both sympathetic looks that suggested he felt pity for us. I knew at once that someone was dead. There was no doubt about it in my mind. I wasn't stupid. Police didn't make house calls for no good reason. My first ominous thought was that something dreadfully bad had happened to poor Granny May. Maybe one of her witchy experiments, using herbal concoctions that she brewed on the stovetop in her black cauldron, had accidentally killed her. Granny May would wander off into the woods, picking flowers, wild garlic, berries, grasses and fungi indiscriminately, to make herbal tinctures and spells. My mother was terribly worried about this strange practice of hers, as on one occasion Granny May had picked several poisonous mushrooms that she had added to her brew. Had my mother not spotted them in time, they might have killed her. On this occasion, had she accidentally picked a poisonous plant by any chance, that she assumed was benign? Maybe she had intaken it, ingested it in some way. Or worse still, was the monster that me and my brother had seen, that lived in the woods, finally gobbled her up? Frankly, I was still surprised that Granny May was still alive, with that hideous thing lurking around in the woods, always watching, always waiting. Frankly, it was amazing he hadn't eaten her up already. The last person I ever envisaged for a single moment that would be dead was my father. In fact, I never gave that thought a fleeting regard. Later that day, with red eyes and a puffy-looking face, my mother had taken us into the living room and told us she had something to tell us. "It's your father," she said. "Dad," I said. "Is he all right, Mum?" "No, sweetheart. I'm sorry, Alistair, he's not. Your father is not all right." She said the words with a cracked voice, as if her voice was breaking under the weight of what she was telling us. "Is he in hospital? Has he been in an accident? Is that why the police were here?" I asked. I now became unduly alarmed, as you would expect. I could feel the panic rising from my belly button right up to the back of my throat, like a rambunctious, big, overexcited tsunami wave, bringing with it trepidation and terror. I knew with a certainty what my mother would say next, and that it would have long-reaching repercussions over our lives. It seems I wasn't wrong, as it absolutely did. Somewhere deep, buried within my gut, an insidious gnawing feeling was telling me what my mother was about to say. It turned out my prognostication was alarmingly accurate. Your father is never coming back. He died this morning when crossing the street with a work colleague to go and pick up some breakfast at the coffee shop over the road, before the major meeting about the merger. I'm so sorry, loves. Tears spilled down my mother's cheeks as she looked at us through her red-rimmed eyes and blew her nose loudly in a tissue. No, it can't be true, I cried up. You're lying to us. Daddy's not dead. He can't be dead. There's no way he's dead. Don't say things like that, Mum, when they're not true. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but it is true. Your father is dead. But how could he just die? I asked nonplussed. There was nothing wrong with him. He was healthy. He doesn't have health problems like Mr. Gomjoli next door. Apparently your father collapsed on the street. Why that happened, I do not know. Samuel Evans was with him at the time. They were picking up some food stuff to bring back to the office before the meeting, before the meeting transpired. Samuel said 1 minute your father was having a joke with him, and the next he went down like a pack of cards on the street. Pedestrians everywhere came to his aid, like ants out of an anthill. One of them was a doctor, would you believe? They discovered he wasn't breathing, and they couldn't do anything to revive him. Believe me, they tried. But there was no response, no heartbeat, nothing. The police arrived on the scene, and the ambulance team announced him dead. My mother burst into floods of tears. Oh, I never expected this to happen to us. It's so unfair, isn't it? Your father took such good care of himself. How could this happen? It makes no sense whatsoever. He did everything to live a healthy life, and it was cruelly taken from him like this. Me and my brother stared at my mother with incredulous wide eyes. We did not cry at first. The sobering news was far too surreal to take on board. There had to be a grievous mistake. My father was the epitome of good health. It couldn't have been him that had died. But my mother's face revealed our very worst fears. She read our thoughts as clear as the day. It is your father, Alistair. There is no doubt about that. Remember, Samuel Evans was with him when it happened. He confirmed it was your father that died and collapsed on the street. Furthermore, the officer gave me his watch. My heart sank like a heavy stone, being flung into a great big lake, for I knew my father would never remove the watch my mother had given him on their wedding day. He loved that watch with a passion, so if the officer removed it from my dad's body, then it was indeed my father that had been found dead. In that indelible, heart-wrenching moment, reality leered at me with its cold, cruel, heartless eyes, and I had to ingest its bitter gall. And so in that formidable second, I ran to the loo and regurgitated the contents of my stomach, until my stomach hurt so much that I couldn't bring anything else up. For a long time, me and my brother stared vacuously into space. "Dad's dead," I said, trying to make the words I was saying seem real. I repeated them a plethora of times, so that they'd finally sink in. Even after throwing up in the bathroom, I just could not get my head around this bitter, unwelcome truth. My mother nodded. "That's right, Alistair, he's dead. I'm so sorry, kids. I don't know what to say. It's too dreadful for words. What a nightmare this day has been. But don't you worry, my loves. We'll somehow get through this. You know how upbeat and positive your father always was. The last thing he'd want was for us to be sad." Me and my brother ran into my mother's arms. The three of us began to weep together, united in our great grief. The remnants of the meat concoction my mother had prepared and left in the bowl to make hamburger patties remained untouched, and was never made into patties, but instead given by me very discreetly to Mr. Gomjola's very appreciative bulldog. None of us had the stomach to eat, for our appetites had abandoned us. Indeed, I thought I would probably never ever eat again. With my dad gone from our lives, what was the point of anything any more? The worst part of it all was that my mother was a stay-at-home mother, with no skills to her repertoire. She had married my father at 21 years old. She had never worked a single day in her life. My father had assured her there was no need for her to work. He would take care of the family's need and bring in the steady income which he had done. But over the last year, my father's mother was sadly diagnosed with an aggressive form of bladder cancer. His mother's cancer treatment had eaten so much of the family's money up, as her extortionate medical costs were crippling. And my grandmother, who was so absent-minded, had failed to pay her medical insurance because she had clean forgotten about it, so the policies had collapsed. My dad had insisted on giving her the very best that healthcare could provide, and it would seem all our money was whittled away. Worse still, it hadn't helped my grandmother in the slightest. She had sadly died a few months later, without any noticeable improvements to her deteriorating, declining health, despite all the chemotherapy she had endured to prolong her life. But prolong her life it did not. My father's bank balance was in a bleak state. The irony of ironies is 2 weeks before my father died, he had spontaneously cancelled his life insurance policy. Talk about very bad timing.
With the merger happening with my company, he told my mother, I've decided to cancel my life insurance policy for the time being, as our finances are in a bleak state and need to recover. It'll only be for a very short while, so don't worry about it, he told my mother. Until our finances look a little rosier. We need to get some bills paid, and then I will resume my insurance policies with a new company that Samuel Evans reckons is a great deal better. My mother had been disquieted about this manoeuvre on my father's part. You didn't do incredulous things like this. She saw it as taking unnecessary risks. You scare me doing this, Kenneth, she had said, even if it is for the short term. I know we're a little skint at the moment, thanks to your mother's excessive extortionate cancer treatments, but it's not the end of the world, is it? We'll get through this. But cancelling your life insurance policy is like tempting fate, don't you think? If something dreadfully bad were to happen to you, how would I take care of the kids? I have no essential life skills. Who would ever want to employ me? You're playing a dangerous game, love, and I don't like it one bit. What do you mean? My father had asked her. Well, if you quit paying the life insurance, even if it is only for a short while, I worry that the very moment you stop paying, that's exactly when something bad might happen. I couldn't bear anything untoward to happen to you. If you weren't around, how would I cope? How would I provide for our children? I would have no choice but to move back to Ravenscroft to live with my mother. You know how unorthodox and idiosyncratic that woman can be. And the children were never happy living there. They never liked the place. Nothing's going to happen to me, love. You're far too superstitious. But then again, you were raised by that very superstitious mother of yours, so she would probably make you think like that. Look at me. I'm as fit as a fiddle, am I not? He said, slapping his cast-iron stomach proudly. Not an ounce of fat on me anywhere. No high blood pressure, no cholesterol, no blood sugar problems. Even the doc says I'm good to live forever. Nobody lives forever, love. Even you know that. And I'm not even talking about your health. Don't you get it, Kenneth? Believe it or not, there are other ways people's lives can be cut short. People die in car accidents all the time, do they not? Or accidents in the home or workplace. You're not invincible, Kenneth, for God's sake. I wish you would realize that. Your cancelling this life insurance policy is a red flag to me. It's freaking me out, it really is. It's a foolish, very foolish thing to do. I'm sorry, I can't help being superstitious about the matter. But it's got nothing to do with my mother's influence over my life. I'd never ever walk under a ladder, nor would I cancel any insurance policies. And the latter is a harebrained thing to do. I'm sorry, but it is. You should know better, Kenneth. Don't you worry, my love. As soon as we're financially a lot better off, we can resume payment. In the meantime, nothing is going to happen to me. Now, if I was Mr. Gomjola next door, I would hang on to my life insurance policies as tightly as I possibly could, and never let them go. But I'm not him, am I? So there's nothing to worry about.
My mother told me that in that moment she had an awful, ominous feeling. She knew that if something bad happened to my dad, she would be dependent on a life insurance payout in order to take good care of us. My father did seem to believe he would live forever, in a manner of speaking, because he took great care of himself. But alas, as my mother had said, no one is immortal. My mother had pointed out to my father that health gurus like Robert Atkins, Joseph Pilates, Michel Montignac, and Jim Fixx all had died at young ages, having advocated a healthy lifestyle, with many, many followers, and yet their health advice had not helped them to live a long life themselves. It just goes to show that life is far too short to deprive ourselves of all the nice things that life has to offer us. I myself would be very angry if I got to the other side and realized I'd deprived myself of cheesecake and donuts. And for what? How I wished my father had listened to my mother's cautionary note of warning. Now we were going to have to live with Granny May at Ravenscroft, so our worst fears were being fully realized. I felt so much tangible grief, with Dad no longer being around, but also I felt rather angry towards him for letting Mum down like this. My mother would now be forced to work. She'd probably have to find a job giving her a minimum wage, and that was not exactly going to inspire her with any confidence. And me and my brother Hamish could be stuck indefinitely, living at Ravenscroft for the remainder of our childhoods. One unwelcome thought kept seeping into my mind over and over again. Was that hairy monster still in the woods, I wondered? I bet he was. Knowing our luck, he'd be after us again. And then what about that old man that visited us at the dead of night and stood watching us at the end of our beds? Would he still be there? Me and my brother Hamish knew that what had happened at Ravenscroft had been very real. It didn't help that Granny May fancied herself as a witch, even though my mother had said it was all harmless fun on her part. But I ask you, when is dabbling with the occult completely harmless? Of course it's not. It's probably significantly worse if you don't know what the hell you're doing, because then you can indiscriminately open portals into the unseen realms that you cannot visibly see and let something atrocious through. Granny May was clueless about what she was doing. She had always been very experimental. The tragedy was that no one ever took her very seriously, not even my mother. So when she said she was a witch, nobody really paid attention. But she was always playing around with that dog-eared book of spells of hers. The biggest misfortune of all was that she had no mentors working in the occult with her to give her sound advice, so that she could always be guarded from doing anything stupid. Granny May performed all manner of rituals. I knew this because I'd seen her doing so when I'd been living at Ravenscroft. But what if she called up something from the abyss? The thought did not bear thinking about, because if that was the case, moving to Ravenscroft would be worse than we remembered. I could only hope to God that Granny May was not a complete ignoramus. My mother assured me that my grandmother was not stupid, but I could easily imagine her playing with a Ouija board, and I had heard horrifying reports of such things, especially from our pastor at church. Our next-door neighbour, Mr. Gomjoli, was visibly very upset when he heard the tragic news about Dad's fortuitous passing. Me, my brother and mother were taken aback by his emotional outburst. It touched us to the quick.
Oh, my God! Kenneth is dead! It can't be true! It can't be true!
He said, shaking his head furiously.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Gomjoli.
my mother had said kindly. "I know you liked my husband a lot. We're very devastated he died like this, but I'm afraid it is true." "Oh, my God! This is awful, awful news," said Mr. Gomjoli, tears spilling down his well-upholstered cheeks, which he dabbed away with a tissue. "I never expected this to happen. Kenneth was a very good man," he wailed. "He was helping me change my diet and lifestyle, you know. I was making good progress with him. He came over to my house with some weights, and he became like a personal trainer to me, out of the goodness of his heart, you know. He didn't want any payment from me. Your husband, Mrs. Sanchez, was the very best." "You mean my Kenneth organized an exercise program for you?" my mother asked in astonishment. "He never told me this, Mr. Gomberley. You do surprise me. It seems my husband is a dark horse."
"Yes, he did," said Mr. Gomjoli. "It was our secret. I've already lost 23 kilos, thanks to your husband," he told us proudly. "He told me he wasn't going to live next door to me and watch me steadily kill myself with my overeating, my lack of exercise. Now he's the one that's gone. How is that even fair? I'm the one that's been filling myself with garbage for all these years. Yet it's your husband that's the one that's died. It's a real wake-up call to me, Mrs. Sanchez, let me tell you. I'm going to lose this weight once and for all," said Mr. Gomjoli firmly, "in honour of your husband's memory. I'm going to do it for him."
"But I thought you said you didn't know why you were so fat, Mr. Gomjoli," I said. "You told us you lived on rabbit food, lettuce and tomatoes. You said your weight was a medical mystery that baffled your doctors."
Mr. Gomjoli flushed, his face growing as red as a London bus. "Don't believe everything you hear, young man. I was just refusing to take accountability for myself. I was in denial about how much I was eating. Ostensibly admitting you have a problem, as your father wisely told me, is the very first step to healing. If you want to know the truth, young man—"
"It's Alistair," I reminded him.
"Well, Alistair, I've been putting away volumes of food for many long years, stuffing my face with all the food items you found in my garbage a while back. They were not my brother's, they were mine. The truth is I didn't have a brother. I made him up. Nor do I ever visit the healthy gourmet in town. I wasn't always this fat, you know."
"You mean you've been thin before?" I asked Mr. Gomjoli in disbelief, as if the very idea of him being thin was close to impossible.
"Don't look so shocked, young man. I'll have you know I was a quarterback in my day, and the girls didn't half fancy me. I was quite the looker, you know, even if I say so myself. You stay there, Alistair, and I'll prove it to you."
Mr. Gomjoli eagerly scuttled back into his house, his whole body heaving and groaning under his massive girth. When he returned, he proudly produced a skinny photograph of himself when he was in his teens. He did look rather like a quarterback, and was in astonishingly good shape. To say I was dumbfounded by the photograph was an understatement. "Mr. Gomjola, you really look exceptionally good. Very fit in this photograph. Is it really you?"
"Yes, it is me."
"But are you being serious, Mr. Gomjoli? You look amazing. You've got a physique like my father had in this photograph. You look really, really ripped."
"It was me," said Mr. Gomjoli, "and it will be me again. I'm very tired of being this way. Your father made me put this photograph up on my fridge to remind me that I need to get back into shape. And it's working a treat, I have to say. Every time I think about ordering another doner kebab, Taco Bell, Kentucky Fried Chicken, or deep pan pizza, I look at this photograph, and then I make a better choice."
"What made you get so big, Mr. Gomjoli, if you don't mind me asking?"
I asked. "My mother's death," he said sadly, a tear sliding down his cheek. "When she died, I felt so desperately lonely. There was a vacuous, empty space in my heart that needed filling. I suppose I used food. I know what you're going through, young man. Sorry, Alistair, losing your father like you've done. But don't turn to food for comfort like I did. Let's just say it's not worth it. Take it from me. I have to go to bed every night with precautionary oxygen. I wear a mask over my face for my sleep apnea, in case I stop breathing during the night. I'm taking a ton of medications that have hundreds of side effects. I have ulcers all over my legs and feet that are failing to heal due to my diabetes. All these problems would go away if my addiction to food would go as well. It's become like a life sentence to me, if you understand.
When my family returned to the neighbourhood a year later to visit Douglas Hughes and his family, we went knocking at Mr. Gomjoli's front door to say hello. A skinny, good-looking guy answered the door. It came as a shock to us that the man who answered the door was Mr. Gomjoli himself. We barely recognised the man. He was so incredibly changed. He gave my dad all the credit for the miraculous transformation to his health. He was no longer on high blood pressure medications, nor was he diabetic any longer. He was prepping himself to run in the Boston Marathon. We couldn't believe it was the same man. And to know my dad was the inspiration for his astonishing metamorphosis brought me great comfort. I wasn't looking remotely forward to moving to Ravenscroft to live with Granny May. But I guess you know that by now, as I've harped on about it for long enough. Ravenscroft was a sequestered Victorian property, not very far from Lake Superior, which straddles the United States and Canadian border, with the province of Ontario to the north, and to the east the state of Minnesota, to the west Michigan, and to the south Wisconsin. So she lived in the region of the Great Lakes, but as you can fully appreciate, Ravenscroft itself was like a dot on a map, even though Granny May's property was sizable enough, stretching out like a magnanimous yawn, boasting ponds, creeks, acres of woods, and so much more. In truth, even though the nearby town was about 30 minutes away, you felt very cut off from the rest of the world when you were living there, as if you were living far away from any human habitation. There were, of course, ranches and farms in the area, and a plethora of horse-riding trails. I suspect for many kids coming to this very prepossessing part of the world, it would be like a dream come true for them. But not for me and my brother Hamish. We knew exactly what was lurking in the innocent grove of trees at Ravenscroft. As my mother's four-wheel drive trundled down those long windy roads, I sensed we were getting closer to the place. My heart began to burn in my chest, almost as if I had acid boiling inside of me. In truth, I probably did. I was very apprehensive about coming back here, as the haunting memories became all the more vivid as we cautiously made our approach. Soon we saw the familiar worn-out wooden sign, which had come under significant wear and tear over the years, and certainly since we last saw it. The sign stood rather crookedly, up outside the narrow path through the trees, like a wonky bird table. It read Ravenscroft, although the painted lettering inside the carved letters had all but worn away. We were here, and Nevada now seemed like a lifetime away. I could see the formidable black wrought-iron gates that stood up proud and tall, barring the rest of the world from entering this formidable, unwelcoming place. You'd think that over a few years I'd have forgotten Ravenscroft, but I absolutely had not. Some memories I just don't think ever fade, especially when there's a formidable-looking monster entangled within the silken webs of your memory. Let's just say even if you spilled bleach on those memories, they'd never ever go away, but seem to be rekindled on this day, as the familiar features of Ravenscroft tumbled into our view. "We are here," said my mother, looking from me to my brother Hamish, as if she was expecting to deal with a couple of protesting spitfires, but instead we stared blankly ahead of ourselves, as if we were a couple of tormented steers, going to the slaughterhouse, and resigned to our inevitable plight, as if we had surrendered, if not rather unwillingly, to whatever it was that fate had in store for us.
"Don't you dare look like that," said my mother. "Goodness gracious me! Why such long faces on the both of you? You kids can be so melodramatic when you want to be.
Anyone would think you were going to a funeral right now. You know exactly why, I said curtly. Now I don't want this sulky attitude exhibited by you in front of Granny May. Do you understand, Alistair? Said my mother sternly, giving me a warning look that told me in no uncertain terms she wanted no funny business from both of us. May is your grandmother, and I want you to be desperately nice to her. She's putting a roof over our heads, and so I expect you both to show a bit of gratitude towards her. Granny May is allowing us to live with her out of the goodness of her heart, and she doesn't expect a penny in return. So I expect the both of you to show some thankful appreciation, instead of looking like someone who's dropped $100 and found a penny in its place. I saluted my mother and said, "Aye, aye, sir." My mother opened the window of her car and pressed the intercom system on. We could hear it ringing inside the house, like a telephone, but no one answered, so my mother pressed it again. Then we heard Granny May's slightly breathless voice on the crackling intercom system. It seemed so far away. "Is that you, Flo?" "Yes, it's me, Mum. I'm here with the kids." "Oh, good. I'm so glad you've arrived safely. I can't wait to see you all." The gate just opened as if by magic. My mother's car swept boldly down the driveway that was heavily fringed by a tangle of tall, lofty trees that hugged each other tightly, almost as if there was no breathing space left between the branches. Things had grown exponentially since I'd last been here. The narrow, unfriendly driveway whipped boldly through the woods like a scribble on a piece of paper, but finally stretched out magnanimously into a wide open space, where in the background you could see the prominent rise and falls of the mountains that were determined to crown our impression of this summer day with their sculptural but regal resplendence. I could see clusters of flowers clinging brightly to the foothills of the mountains, carpeting its ragged contours in a glorious halo of pretty colours. There were yellows, pinks and violets, creeping into each other, like the subtle pale pastel shades that you see in a Van Gogh watercolour painting. Everything was so splendidly viridescent, almost as if the grass and the trees themselves had swallowed up bucket loads of verdant green paint, which they were wearing proudly. The view seemed to have soaked up the prepossessing charms of the countryside like a sea sponge, and they would have quite literally taken my breath away if I hadn't been sorely reminded of why we were here. I could feel the fresh mountain air blowing teasingly against my face as it seeped through the half-open crack in the window of my mother's white SUV. It removed the stale smells in the car of a half-eaten greasy cheeseburger my brother had failed to finish during the journey. It replaced it with a refreshing woody and earthy sense of the countryside. The sky was as blue as a cornflower, and the sun that trickled through our rather dusty windscreen window was appreciatively warm and pleasant. It really was a magnificent day. It was a sinister grey asymmetrical Victorian three-storey mansion, with its gabled roofs, towers, turrets and dormers, nestled against the breathtaking backdrop of engaging views that tried to steal the show, with its macabre, disquieting presence. Nothing had changed in that regard. Ravenscroft remained as uninviting, grim and cheerless as it always had been. I did know a little about Ravenscroft history, which was information I'd actually gleaned from my mother a long time ago. It would seem a prominent Victorian man, by the name of Ascot Owens, had built Ravenscroft in the 1800s to suit his needs. The man had been described as a recluse. He shut himself away from the rest of the world and was never seen again by anyone in public. During that time, rumours had abounded and circulated about Ascot Owens. One was that he had a facial disfigurement of some kind that he'd got from an accident and refused to be seen by the general public for fear of ridicule. No one, of course, knew the real reason as to why Ascot Owens shut himself away, but speculation was rife. Ascot had a few servants who took care of his immediate needs. They cooked, cleaned and shopped for him. These faithful servants never divulged the real reason why their master never left Ravenscroft. It would seem they loyally took his secret down to their own graves. On our arrival at Ravenscroft, I observed that the mansion was drenched in a darkness, as if the sun itself had avoided to shine on it, for very good reason. I mean, what does the light have in common with darkness? Nothing at all. As my mother parked her car on the grey stone driveway, fringed by what seemed like borders of neatly trimmed rhododendron bushes, my grandmother's front door, with its stained glass upper panels and dark wooden timber panels, flew wide open. There was Granny May, eagerly dashing towards us, almost as if she was in her early 20s, as such was her enthusiasm. I wish I could have returned the favour to her, and been as ebullient about seeing her as she was in seeing us. But instead of feeling contentedly happy, my heart had become as heavy as lead. Granny May was wearing a wide-brimmed, floppy navy blue straw hat, with a blue cotton dress that skimmed her skinny ankles, and on her feet she was wearing the formidable lace-up boots she always wore, that made her look like a strict governess. I always wondered why she wore shoes like that with a dress. They didn't seem to go together. "Oh, Flo, dear," she said, gathering my mother lovingly in her arms. "It's so good to see you. It's been so dreadfully long, far too long. How I've missed you all so very much. Where are my precious grandchildren?" she asked, her hawk-like eyes descending on our car, as if she was looking for a mouse she wanted to ravage. "They're in the car," my mother chuckled. "For goodness sake, kids," she chortled, "are you going to get out or not? You can't stay in the car all day. Granny May is dying to see you." I inwardly groaned, catching my brother's eye. "We're here, Hamish. We might as well face our demons," I whispered to him. My brother made a face and whimpered, "I wish we could go back to Nevada. I really wish we could." I didn't dignify my brother's complaint with a response, but reluctantly climbed out of the back door of the car, swinging it open as slowly as I could. "Goodness gracious me! Is that Alistair?" said my grandmother, peering at me through her dark bird-like eyes, framed by crepey skin that made her look rather like a tortoise poking its head out of its shell. My grandmother was rarely old. The skin on her face was as fine-textured as rice paper. Her wrinkles were like the squiggly twisted shapes you see on a road map. There were so many of them, all over her face. It would have been impossible for me to count them all. Getting old was not at all pretty, I thought. But one day the very same thing would happen to me. But hopefully not for a long time yet. My grandmother looked smaller than I remembered her to be, almost as if she'd shrunk a lot, although she stood up as straight and erect as a pencil. She was thin and willowy, and appeared to be frail. But I was to learn later, well, seconds later actually, when she gave me that hug, that she was anything but frail. The woman was as strong as an ox, so first appearances can be deceptively misleading. "That's Hamish over there. He's getting out of the car now. He's 12, said my mother, grinning as my brother finally climbed out of the car, with a vacillating hesitancy, which made it conspicuously clear he was not at all happy to be here. Granny May gasped with astonishment when she laid eyes on Hamish. "Hasn't he grown?" said my mother proudly. "I think the last time you saw Hamish, Mum, he was a wee little thing, was he not?" "I'm not a wee little thing," said Hamish, looking completely affronted, giving my mother a contemptuous glare. Hamish hated to be described as small. "I'll have you know, Mum, I'm one of the tallest boys in my year." "I'm sure your mother didn't mean it like that, love. Of course you're not a wee little thing, Hamish," said my grandmother encouragingly. "Far from it, young man. What your mother is saying, Hamish, is that you've grown a lot since I last saw you, and indeed you have. Do you remember me at all?" "I remember you," said Hamish gingerly, giving my grandmother the once-over. I wished in that moment I knew exactly what my brother was thinking, but his stoic expression gave nothing away. My grandmother ran towards me and my brother unabashedly. She eagerly folded us into her arms in a welcome embrace, and her hug was so powerfully strong it almost expunged all the air from my lungs. Granny May might be many things, but frail she certainly was not. My brother nervously looked up at Ravenscroft towards the large bay window of the bedroom that we had shared together when we were last there, as we had insisted on always sharing a room. Hamish visibly flinched as he stared up at the window. He was to tell me later he was sure someone had been standing in that bay window, watching us. Was it the ghostly spectre of the Victorian man that had visited our bedroom at the dead of night when we were kids? It was a terrifying thought, and if I mentioned such things to my mother, she would lightly laugh at me and once again claim it was all in my head. Adults were so irritating that way. They never believed anything you told them. "It's so good to see you, Alistair and Hamish," said my grandmother, rubbing her hands together with glee. "You've grown so big in such a short space of time. It makes me very aware of how old I'm becoming, and I don't enjoy being reminded about that, I'll have you know." "But you are old, Granny May," said Hamish earnestly. "You're very, very old." "Honestly, Hamish, would you mind your manners?" said my mother apologetically. "Granny May is not old." "But I am old, love," said Granny May. "No point in pretending otherwise. Hamish here is absolutely right. I'm a very old lady, and very aware of it too." "Is the monster still in the woods?" my brother asked Granny May rather abruptly. His impetuous outburst rarely knocked the wind out of my sails. I hadn't expected Hamish to say anything like this, especially to Granny May. My mother stared at him bewildered. She opened her mouth and closed it like a stunned goldfish. My brother, ignorant to any offence he might have caused, continued, "The black hairy one that was here last time. He was really, really horrible. I thought he was going to eat us up, Granny May. He was always looking in at us from the bedroom window. He was big and scary." My mother rolled her eyes in the back of her head and sighed in exasperation, but she said nothing. Granny May chuckled politely. She shook her head rather vigorously. "No, of course there are no monsters in the woods, Hamish, love. Where did you get that idea from? When you were last at Ravenscroft, you were a very little boy back then. I'm sure you imagined what you saw." "But what about the old Victorian man? He stood at the end of our beds every night. Is he still haunting your house?" asked my brother. "I thought I saw him in the upstairs window just now, looking down at us. I'm really scared of him, Granny May. He's really, really horrible." "Isn't he, Alistair? He's always horrible, scowling all the time. I don't think he likes us at all." I observed her pale face, growing as red as a field of poppies. If Granny May had nothing to hide, why would she blush like that? "No, you wouldn't, Granny May," said Hamish. "You're an adult, aren't you? You don't see things we see. The black hairy monster wouldn't want you to see him anyway. He knows how to hide in plain sight. But me and Alistair, we saw him often, but it was always at night. How can you be sure, Granny May, that Ravenscroft isn't haunted, if you haven't seen anything yourself, because it doesn't mean it's not there. We saw the old Victorian man standing at the end of our beds when we were living there. He visited us all the time when we were last here. I know the clothes he wore were Victorian, because we learnt about that at school, and they matched what we saw him wearing. I think he's a ghost, but he looked real, and he was really horrible, scowling all the time at us." "You ask a lot of questions, young man," said my grandmother, chuckling awkwardly, although I don't think she was laughing at all. She probably didn't know how else to conduct herself. "I assure you," she insisted, "Ravenscroft is not haunted, whatever you think you saw. It's all in your head, Hamish. You've got a feisty one here, Flora, have you not?" she said, turning her attention on my mother, and probably hoping that the subject could quickly be changed, because I suspect she felt like a deer caught in headlights, with all Hamish's inquiries getting the better of her. One thing was for certain, she was hiding something, and I was to discover that Hamish felt much the same way. He confided in me later that day, saying, "I know Granny May's seen the monster in the woods." "You really think so?" I'd asked him. I know so, Hamish had said. I saw the truth in her eyes. I wonder why she doesn't want to talk about it, why she doesn't want to admit the truth, why she's hiding him from us. Maybe she's just scared we'll leave, I said. I think she's so happy we're here. She's so pleased to see us. She doesn't want us to think there is anything to be afraid of. That's why she's covering it all up. You're right, Alistair, Hamish agreed. I think it must be lonely living in such a big house all on your own. She must be very scared living in this place. I don't even know how she can sleep at night. Do you think she's seen the ghost of the old Victorian man? Maybe she's seen him as well, but doesn't want to admit that to us either. I'm not sure if she has, I said, but she didn't seem surprised when we mentioned him. She knows more than she's letting on, that's for sure. Ma'am, look at you, my mother said. You look so flustered. Don't take any notice of Hamish. She's always like that, winding people up the wrong way. Take no notice of him. He lives in a world of his own, you know. He's a big believer in all this fictitious stuff. He told me all about it before we came here. How there's a ghost in your house and how there's a monster in the woods. It's not fictitious stuff, Mum, said Hamish, glaring furiously at my mother. And when her back was turned, he stuck a tongue out at her, which made me chuckle. Granny May saw my brother sticking his tongue out at my mother, and the corner of her lips twitched with amusement. Seeing Granny May after all these years was rather strange. She wasn't as weird as I first remembered her to be. Maybe Mum was right, that I'd exaggerated her memory in my mind. I think I half expected her to be wearing a Halloween witch's hat and carrying a broomstick in her hands. I was struck by how innocuously harmless Granny May looked. However, I smiled when I saw a black cat peering at us through the bay window in the hallway, its yellow eyes fixed on us with a keen curiosity. This was certainly a new addition to Granny May's home. A witch's accessory, you could say. But I loved cats, so I wasn't going to be complaining about that. I was to learn the cat's name was Ratter, because he was always bringing dead rats into the house, and had a nasty habit of leaving their carcasses in Granny May's bed, as if he believed he was gifting her. He's a lovely cat, she told me. One day he was there on the doorstep at Ravenscroft, so I let him in, gave him something to eat. It was an awfully cold day. He never left, you know, so I guess I just adopted him. He's beautiful, isn't he? I admitted it was true when I cradled him in my arms, and he didn't stop purring. He's lovely, Granny May. He's really lovely. Careful, Alistair, my grandmother warned me sagaciously. If Ratter gets too attached to you, I can assure you he will leave you a dead rat in your bed sheets. And it's a macabre, most wretched sight that you don't want to see. Believe you me, I know all about it. Maybe I'd exaggerated Granny May's eccentricities in my mind, because she seemed so normal, so benign. In truth, she looked like a very ordinary old lady. I suddenly felt guilty for spouting all kinds of mean things about her. My mother was right. It was very kind and generous of her to invite us to live with her at Ravenscroft, even though her grandiose, seemingly haunted mansion was more like a mausoleum than a home. Look, children, said my grandmother, looking at us with worry etched on her face and kindness in her eyes. I'm so glad you've come to live here at Ravenscroft. I wanted to say how sorry I am about the loss of your father. I was very devastated to hear the tragic news. It is so tragic to lose your father so young, when he had his whole life ahead of him, did he not? Life can be dreadfully cruel, and with the two of you still being so little, it's even more disquieting when fortuitous things happen like this so unexpectedly. We're not little, said Hamish insolently, looking quite affronted to be described in this way yet again. Did no one get it? He abhorred being called little. Of course you're not little, Hamish, corrected my grandmother. Did I not say earlier you've become incredibly big over the years? Yes, you did. There you go, Hamish. Please forgive me if I sounded like I was patronizing you. I absolutely was not. What I wanted to tell you both, given all the questions you've been asking me about Ravenscroft, when you were mentioning the noises and stuff like that, I just want to say that that does not mean it's haunted. I've lived in this place all my life, and I've never seen anything at all. Have you, Flora? She said, turning around to look at my mother, her eyes almost pleading my mother to agree wholeheartedly with what she was saying. No, I can't say I've ever seen anything, said my mother. Remember, kids, I grew up here at Ravenscroft. I lived with Granny May and her husband, who was my father and was your grandfather. Sadly, you never knew him because he died before you were born, from emphysema. Growing up, I did hear noises in the house, of course I did. You know, strange bangs and things like that. But it was probably the old pipes. Nothing to worry about, isn't that right, Mum? My grandmother nodded. There you go, you see, she said with a big grin on her face, as if my mother's words had settled any misgivings we may have had. As I stood there with my grandmother next to our car, outside Ravenscroft, I could feel a formidable presence. I knew something was staring at me. I could absolutely feel it. We were being watched. Nervously, I clandestinely glanced around, looking behind me. At first it took a while for my eyes to adjust, given the glare of the sunlight that was shining directly in my face, making my visibility rather obscure. Then I saw him, as plain as the day, the big hairy black monster we'd seen as kids. My God, he was still here, even after all this time. Was he waiting for us? Had he anticipated our return to Ravenscroft? The humanoid creature with its human-looking face that I was later to learn was a Bigfoot, towered up at about 10 foot tall. He was huge, with gargantuan, ponderous shoulders, and a burly, powerful physique that was so intimidating. He stood up powerfully on 2 tree-trunk-sized legs. He was covered with long, dark hair that was so black it gave off a bluish sheen. He was staring directly at me, and for a moment our eyes locked. In that quintessential moment, he didn't appear to be menacing, but rather more curious, with a perplexed look on his face, with a kind of look that said, "What are you doing here?" I glanced away from the Bigfoot for a moment to observe my brother, to see if Hamish had noticed him at all. But thankfully my brother was otherwise engaged, looking up at Granny May, with a disturbed furrow between his eyes, as if he was not remotely satisfied with my grandmother's responses to all of his questions. The truth was, if Granny May's house was haunted at all, it was unlikely she would ever admit it. In my experience, adults like to delude themselves all the time, even though I knew Granny May was hiding something. When I returned my gaze to the trees, the Bigfoot was all but gone. My worst fears were now confirmed. That horrible beast had not gone away at all. Would he climb up the wrought iron trellising outside our bedroom window during the night, where the vine was creeping up the side of the house, and stare in at us like he'd done when we were children, scaring us half to death? I could only hope not. Before the conversation could get any more bleak, or before Hamish could ask Granny May more awkward questions that clearly had left her feeling quite flustered, my grandmother took the quintessential opportunity to whisk us all into the house. "Dear me," she said, "you've all had such a long journey. You must be so exhausted and terribly thirsty. How about some homemade lemonade and some chocolate chip cookies? You'll be glad to know I baked them myself yesterday." My brother's face brightened and lit up like a Christmas tree. He eagerly followed my grandmother into the house, as if the mere mention of chocolate chip cookies had wiped all his menacing foreboding away. My first thought when I entered the grandiose hall in Ravenscroft was, do we really have to live here? The place was so daunting, so dark, menacing and austere, with ornate golden mirrors that cast ominous shadows around the very large airy rooms, that made you believe that your own reflection was a ghostly entity. The huge portraits were done in rich oils, of long since deceased ancestors, probably in our family line. The very smart clothes they were wearing bore no resemblance at all to what we wear today, only further announcing the great age of the property. The largest portrait of all was done in oils, and was situated above the grand fireplace. It was of Ascot Owen himself, who was also one of our long-lost ancestors on my mother's side of the family. I had studied that picture at great length, and there didn't appear to be any disfiguring features on his face, so that could not be the reason he had shut himself away at Ravenscroft for the rest of his life. Something else must have been going on with him. Maybe he'd suffered from agoraphobia, a condition that makes you far too afraid to leave your own home, for no rhyme or reason. The textured ornate wallpaper with its intricate designs were all done in deep colours, from dark greens to burgundies and reds. The patterned carpets were dark, as was the wood panelling, and the heavy furnishings that were upholstered in dark greens, reds and golds. The curtains that framed the windows were heavy and dark. How could Granny May live in such an oppressive, gloomy, foreboding house, all on her own, I wondered. I'd be scared to death living here on my own, in this very dingy place. One thing was for certain. While we lived here, I would share a bedroom with my brother, like we'd done before in the past. There was no way I'd be seen dead sleeping in a bedroom on my own. The first month of our stay at Ravenscroft, everything was calm and serene, very benign. Nothing untoward happened, which was such a relief to me and my brother Hamish. We didn't experience any strange visitations from the ghostly Victorian man, nor did we observe the Bigfoot from the woods, peering in at us through the sash windows of our bedroom, as he balanced on the outside wrought iron trellising. Granted, the house was dark and gloomy, but Granny May was not the weirdo I had painted her out to be. We were to discover she was no longer obsessed with the occult, but had become a devout Christian. I was to learn her dog-eared book of spells that she'd once owned had been promptly discarded and burnt. She had told us this very proudly. More surprising than ever, she was no longer boiling away any herbal tinctures or any spell-like potions. One night I overheard her talking to my mother about why she'd stopped all the incantations, the making of spells, and all the chanting she used to do, and turned to God. This conversation happened between my mother and grandmother on a summer's evening long after we'd gone to bed. Ostensibly I'd got up in the middle of the night, with a parched, very dry, scratchy throat, and was longing for an ice-cold glass of milk. I was naturally afraid to wander around Ravenscroft in the middle of the night, because my past experiences of living here when I was little, so it meant that getting up in the middle of the night was something I never wanted to do, which is why I didn't drink anything before I retired to bed, so that I wouldn't have to answer a call of nature. But now an extreme thirst had seized me, and a trip to the kitchen demanded my immediate focus. Even though me and my brother Hamish had not encountered anything paradoxical or outer-worldly going on in Ravenscroft yet, it didn't mean these transcendent, mythical, supernatural entities weren't actually lurking around. Anything was possible at Ravenscroft. Furthermore, I did know the monster in the woods was still there, which later I learnt was a Bigfoot. I'd seen him myself on the day we'd arrived at Ravenscroft, which had seemed like an inauspicious omen from the very start. I shook my brother to get him to accompany me on the trip to the kitchen. "I'm thirsty," I told him. "I really need to get a glass of milk. Please come with me to the kitchen, Hamish. I don't want to go on my own. I really don't. I need you to come with me." My brother cocked his head from out of his bed covers. "I'm not coming with you," he hissed. "I'm not going traipsing around the house in the middle of the night. I'm sorry, I'm not. Anything could be there." Needless to say, he doggedly refused to leave his bed. There was no point in arguing with my brother, as he pulled the covers over his head and continued to sleep. I reluctantly tiptoed down the creaking staircase that made the most dreadful creaking noise. I tiptoed past the grandfather clock in the hall, which chimed 1 o'clock in the morning. It nearly made me jump out of my skin. It really was late. I needed to be very careful not to wake anyone up. I could see relatively well, as everything was lit up in a soft night light that gave off a bluish hue that made it a lot less spooky. I could hardly blame my brother for refusing to accompany me, to the kitchen. Ravenscroft seemed to develop a life of its own at night. It was like you could hear the pipes groaning and banging, and every creak in the floorboard was very pronounced, so it was incredibly disquieting. I stopped short in my tracks because I'd heard something. What was that? It sounded like disembodied voices, or as if someone had left a radio on far, far away. I was so affrighted by this that I nearly hightailed it back to my bedroom in terror. But then I realized to my astonishment that the mumble of voices was coming from the kitchen, and I recognized them as belonging to my grandmother May and my mother. I couldn't believe that at this late hour Granny May and my mother were still up and about, having a good old chinwag together. You've got to be joking. What they were saying grabbed my immediate attention. I stood very still as I approached the kitchen door, eavesdropping onto their every word. And what they said was so incredibly interesting that I forgot all about my thirst for a brief moment. My immediate apprehension of being up and about in this spooky, very intimidating house during the witching hour abandoned me very quickly. Granny May was confessing stuff to my mother that she would normally be loath to convey. "But I don't understand," came my mother's voice. "You were so into the occult, weren't you? You mean to tell me you're not brewing any of those strange herbal concoctions with their magical properties, or chanting any incantations from that dog-eared book of spells of yours that you got from that old bookshop? You were so into the occult for years and years. What happened, Mum? When you told me you'd become a Christian, I actually thought you were joking. But you really are a Christian. I just can't believe it. Now anything is possible for anyone, if you can become a Christian, that is." For a moment my Granny May was very quiet, and then she said gingerly, "I thought I was just pursuing a passion with the occult, that's all. But it turned out it wasn't so harmless after all. I was messing around with stuff I did not fully understand. I didn't realize how dangerous that was, you know, Flora. I had a rude awakening, let me tell you. Given what I was doing for so many years, I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner. I had a lucky escape, you know." "What do you mean?" my mother asked. "Do you really want to know? Because it's quite the story, and I'm not sure you've got the stomach for it, dear." "I want to hear, Mum. What are you talking about? You need to tell me." "Well, I will, if that's the case, since you're always so demanding, Flora. Well, where do I start? I followed a little ritual in my book of spells, step by step, you could say. It looked like a rather sophisticated spell. I wasn't sure I would be able to follow it accurately. Moments later, all hell broke loose in this house. A wind blew into this house like a tornado. It was fearsome, let me tell you. Things began to fly indiscriminately absolutely everywhere. Books, china, you name it. Even chairs were flung upside down. The curtains were moving friskily, like the sails of a very large boat out at sea. I've never been so afraid, Flora, in all my born days. It was absolutely terrifying. There are no words to describe how affrighted I was. In that quintessential moment, I knew something quite catastrophic was going to happen to me. This feeling of impending doom overcame me, like a mouse caught in a trap, sensing there's no way out, if you know what I mean. "No, I don't know what you mean, Mother," my mother asked, bewildered. "Well, do I need to spell it out, love? I summoned up a demon, didn't I, Flora? That's what I mean. This grotesque, hideously ugly thing tried to kill me." "What? You're kidding! What do you mean, Mum, it tried to kill you? You're scaring me." "Well, don't worry, I'm here now, aren't I, so I'm all right. Well, it just began after my incantation, after I lit up some black candles and was beginning to follow the spell, you know, like a recipe in a cookbook. Well, the wind howled through the house, and I'm not kidding when I say this, Flora. but Ravenscroft shook from its very foundations with this powerful storm of energy. Everything rattled precariously. Are you kidding me, Mum? You're saying that this actually happened? Well, of course it did. I wouldn't say so otherwise, would I? But it does get worse. Brace yourself. There was a great big cloud of black developing before me, about 3 feet away, perhaps, like a thick black mist that was starting to take on a shape of its own. I was mortified by this. I just stood there staring in bemusement at this thick black smoke, unable to understand what on earth was happening. But something was glaring at me from inside this smoke. I could feel a vile, malevolent hatred coming from that smoke, directed exactly at me. The smoke began to growl fiercely at me, as if something was in that smoke, and whatever it was incredibly evil. Ma'am, is this for real? Forgive me if I am finding this very hard to digest, but you're beginning to sound as fanciful as my own children. When have I ever made up stories to you, Flora? I'm not about to start now, am I? Never. I'll give you that, Mum. Well, there you go, then. You can't make the stuff up, can you? Go on. You're saying a great wind blew through Ravenscroft, causing chaos in its wake, chucking things around indiscriminately, after you had performed this magic incantation from your book of spells. That's right. It was terrible, Flora. Too terrible for words. All the mirrors in this house cracked at once, and that great big picture of the recluse gentleman Ascot Owen, the original owner of Ravenscroft, came crashing to the floor. I heard bangs, disembodied screams, you name it. I have no words to tell you how afraid I was. I froze to the spot, and the worst thing was that I knew I'd called something up. It was like I'd opened a portal or something. I was absolutely certain of it. And the most terrifying thing of all is I wouldn't have had any clue how to close it. Oh, how awful, Mum! You poor thing! I know you're not making this up. The look in your eyes tells me as much. Are you sure you want to talk about this? You're trembling all over. Can I pour you a stiff drink or something to calm your nerves down a little? I think you really need it, you know. Flora, that's an excellent idea. Could you get me a stiff brandy? Make it a large one, will you? Of course, Mum. I'll make it a double. I could hear my mother opening cupboards and pouring brandy into a glass tumbler, which she gave to Granny May, who drank it down in one big grateful glug. Ah, that is so much better. Dutch courage is exactly what I need when talking about things like this. Honestly, look at me. I can't stop trembling. You don't have to talk about this, Mum, if it's making you uncomfortable. I don't need you getting upset. No, I do need to tell you about this, Flora. I owe you an explanation. You see, when your children came here to Ravenscroft, I remember on the very first day that Hamish arrived here, he was asking about the ghost of the Victorian man that stood at the end of his bed, and about a monster that had peered at him through the window. But you know that that's their imagination, Ma'am. They always talk about things like that. Those two have got great imaginations, I can assure you of that. No, it's not their imaginations, Flora. It's real. What they saw was real. And I will explain as to why I know this to be true. My mother sounded incredulous. Are you telling me that Hamish and Alistair did not imagine the things they claimed to have seen when they were last living here at Ravenscroft? They weren't making this up, Flora. They saw those things. The big problem with us adults is we're quick to dismiss what our children claim to have seen. But they are often able to see things we fail to see as adults. I don't know how to react to this, Mum. You better start at the beginning of your story, or I'm going to get hell of a confused. You were saying you performed this incantation, and all hell broke loose in Ravenscroft, giving you a feeling of impending dread. Then something in a thick black fog began to manifest before you. Is that right? That's right, Flora. The black mist became a 12-foot demon. He was grey in colour, with horns on his head, and red, very furious eyes. He was monstrously huge, Flora. There are no words to describe how hideous and terrifying this thing was. Granny May suddenly burst into tears as she told my mother her outlandish, very bizarre story. I clandestinely remained behind the kitchen door, but I was trembling. My eyes grew as wide as saucers, as I was unable to believe what I was actually hearing. "Oh, Mum! Oh, I wish you wouldn't cry, you poor, poor thing. What you've been through! You must have been petrified. Here's a tissue. Blow your nose." "Demons are real, Flora. You've got to believe me," said my grandmother, rigorously blowing her nose and wiping away the tears that had gathered up in her eyes. "What I have to tell you, Flora, is that demons are very real. You've got to believe me on this." "I believe you, Mum. What did this entity do? Please to God, don't tell me he attacked you. I don't want to hear that, Mum." "It happened so quickly, Flora. For me, it might as well have been a lifetime. Every second seemed like hours and hours. It was agonizing. The demon was glaring at me through malevolent red eyes, growling furiously, exposing a mouthful of sharp canine teeth. He spoke in a raspy voice in Latin, and he said, "Ego sum childeri." Do you know what that means in Latin? It means I'm going to kill you. I looked it up. "Oh, Mum, you're scaring me talking like this. Look at me, I'm shaking like a leaf." "Hold your horses, Mum. I can't take this for the moment. I'm going to be getting some brandy for myself. Would you like another tipple?" "Yes, I would, love. Make it a double again. Talking about this is making my nerves get on edge. But I do need to talk about this stuff, and I'm so glad to have a listening ear from you, Flora." I heard my mother rattling around in the kitchen, pouring out the brandy in a couple of tumblers. Granny May and my mother both knocked back a few stiff drinks, while Granny May continued with her story. "This thing did attack me. I've got a picture on my cell phone of the dark marks that manifested around my neck after the attack. Let me show them to you, Flora." There was silence in the kitchen, and I heard my mother gasp. "My husband had marks like that around his neck, days before he died, Mum. The coroner said she didn't know where they came from, but they looked like the marks around your neck. The coroner could find no reason as to why my husband died. I wonder if this demon that attacked you had something to do with my husband's death. Do you think it's a possibility?" "Oh, God, no," said my grandmother. "Well, I hope not. I'd hate to think that my incantation had far-reaching repercussions, and that inadvertently I might be responsible for your husband's early demise because of what I chose to conjure up. I didn't choose it, though, did I? I just manifested it somehow." "Don't be silly, Mum. I'm sure it's a coincidence," said my mother, but her quivering voice made me sense she believed otherwise. "I do remember that before my father died, a week before he died, he was having nightmares about Ravenscroft, and then he ended up having these strange marks around his neck. Could they be connected? Had this monster that my grandmother conjured up through one of her spells actually inadvertently killed my father? It was always a possibility, but I guess we would never know the answer to that enigmatic question." "So you're saying, Mum, that this awful entity attacked you? This thing had hold of me, Flora. It grabbed me by the scruff of my neck. It was squeezing me so hard that I couldn't breathe. Then it would let go of me and start all over again and again. as if it was getting a thrill from killing me. "Oh, Mum, I don't know what to say. That is terrible." "Well, I would have been killed," said my grandmother, "but something quite remarkable happened that saved the day. I heard my front door being broken down. The demon heard it too. He looked up, and stomping into my house was the most massive Bigfoot you have ever seen in your life." "A Bigfoot?" asked my mother. "You mean a Bigfoot broke down your front door, barged straight into your house? But whatever for?" "That's exactly what happened, Flora. Mum, you must forgive me, but this story of yours is sounding preposterous. I'm finding it hard to digest. What happened next?" "Well, this big demon was absolutely terrified of the Bigfoot. And I mean terrified. The Bigfoot began to chant something in a strange language. Pilataki, haki tali, haki tapali, haki talabi. And the demon morphed into black smoke. The Bigfoot had a stone in his hand. The stone absorbed all that smoke. I saw it with my very own eyes, Flora. Then the Bigfoot stomped off to another part of my home and began to chant again. Hakim pati manakali, haki pani lanati akobasha. I learnt later he was actually closing a portal that I'd opened in my home, that had let this thing through. I stood there, Flora, staring in bewilderment at this Bigfoot. He was enormous, you have no idea. But he had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen, and I knew that with him I was safe. You won't believe what happened next. He actually spoke to me. Can you believe it, Flora? The Bigfoot spoke to me." "He spoke to you?" asked my mother. "You mean in English? Are you kidding me?" "Of course not, Flora. He didn't speak to me in English. He spoke to me in his own mythical language. But the exchange was telepathic, because I knew what his words meant. Amanatala, Angala Sidabana, Hatilaki Swasana. "What did he say?" my mother asked. "He said he'd been watching me for a very long time, and was grievously concerned with all my practices. The stuff I'd been conjuring up with my spells, so to speak. He said that he could see that I was potentially going to open up a portal and let something in, and invite in a demon or something, and that beast could have dominion over me, finally possessing me or even killing me." "He told you that?" "Yes, he did. He also told me that the original owner of Ravenscroft, Ascot Owen himself, was very concerned about my welfare. For years, that dead man was wandering around Ravenscroft in the middle of the night, watching over your children when they were living here. He was angry with me for dabbling with stuff I didn't understand. He was very concerned I'd bring something through the veil because of the spells I was casting. You won't believe it, Flora, but when you were living here with your children at Ravenscroft, I sometimes thought I was actually losing my mind. I would find my book of spells hidden in the most obscure places. One time I found it parked in the fireplace among all the wood. At the time I thought your children were playing tricks on me. Now I know better. Ascot Owen was literally telling me to burn the thing up, which, if I had done a long time ago, none of this would have happened. He kept hiding that book of spells from me to stop me from doing any damage. And goodness gracious me, I didn't even have an idea. So you could say he's been a very protective spirit. He's the one that's obviously been standing at the end of your children's beds when they were here at Ravenscroft, watching over them very protectively." "So you're saying that the ghostly spectre that visited my kids at the dead of night was actually Ascot Owen, the very same man? I feel so bad for dismissing my children's claims. They've been telling me the truth all along. They were terrified of their ghostly visitor, who was Ascot Owen himself, and he was actually looking out for them all along. That's what you're telling me, isn't it, Mum? That's exactly what I'm saying, Flora. According to the Bigfoot, Ascot was staying around to protect me from myself. The Bigfoot told you that? He did indeed. He told me he hadn't meant to scare my grandchildren, but would look in on them at night through the window to check that there was no dark energy around. He told me he climbed up the wrought iron trellising and would look in on them. But he was certain he scared them half to death, and apologized for that. Well, he did that all right, my mother admitted. So what else did the Bigfoot do? She asked. Well, he told me he'd closed the portal, contained the demon, but I needed to stop what I was doing, or something much worse would happen to me. The very next morning, Flora dear, I went to church. I burnt everything up, and I felt happier than I have in a very long time, like a dark weight had been lifted off my life. The Bigfoot's still out there in the woods, I know he is. His family have lived there for generations, I believe. There is a portal, I understand, in there, that they watch over to keep closed so nothing comes through into our reality. It seemed with my shenanigans, I inadvertently opened one up in my own house. Can you believe that, Flora? The mind boggles. But the good news is that there is no more ghost around this house. Ascot Owen is no longer around. And as for the Bigfoot, I doubt he'll bother your children again. So on that score, they're going to be absolutely fine. But there's still a heaviness here at Ravenscroft, Mother, my mother said. I felt it when I was a girl. Everyone at the school I attended thought Ravenscroft was haunted. And I do remember when I had a birthday party at this house, no one ever came, because they thought the place was haunted, and they were intimidated by it. So after that, I had all my birthday parties at the diner in town. I never ever brought any friends over for a sleepover at Ravenscroft, because this place, Mum, has always been formidably sinister. Well, I wish you'd told me this before, love. I had no idea you felt this way, said Granny May. Well, look at the house, Mum. It's a grey, oppressive colour, is it not? Everything's so gloomy and dark. The kids didn't want to come back here. In truth, they were absolutely dreading it. They were terrified of the ghost of Ascot Owen that would enter their bedroom every night, and the monster, which I now know must have been a Bigfoot, that climbed up the trellising to look in at them. This house always gave them the heebie-jeebies, and it didn't help, Mum, that you were practising all those strange spells. I had no idea the children felt this way. I wish you had told me this, Flora dear. But then again, you've always refrained from expressing your opinion for fear of being rude. I'm your mother, Flora. You can tell me anything you like. Look at your son Hamish. He wasn't afraid to tell me how old he thinks I am. Do you know what? I like his honesty. I really do. I would appreciate the same from you, love, even if it's not what you want to hear. You have all moved in with me, and this is a huge house for one person to live in alone. I felt extremely isolated living here at Ravenscroft, so when you asked if you could come and move in with me, I was absolutely elated and overjoyed. I want to make Ravenscroft a welcoming place for the all of you. We can change things around here, bring a lot of light and sunshine into this house if you like. Unfortunately, the energy reflects the state of Mr. Ascot Owen himself. He was a recluse, you know, and I suspect when he built Ravenscroft in the 1800s, the mansion reflects his very bleak despair. He never left the property, you know, until the very day he died. It's a tragic story. What a life to be stuck in one place for the rest of your days, with only the servants attending to your every need. All the rumours that flew around about Ascot Owen back in the day were really horrendous, you know. Many believed he was badly disfigured, but no one knew why he hid away in this house. Do you know why he was such a recluse? My mother asked Granny May. I do, as it happens. The Bigfoot downloaded the answers into my own head, from Ascot Owen himself. Do you know, Flora dear, it was Ascot who told the Bigfoot that I was being demonically attacked. That was why he came to my rescue and broke down the front door. So why was Ascot Owen a recluse for so many years then, Mum? Well, he fell in love with a young woman called Hazel. She was the daughter of his father's butler, I believe. I think she was a couple of years older than Ascot. But how those two crossed paths, I don't know, but they obviously did. Anyway, Ascot's father was very, very close to his butler. However, he wouldn't allow under any circumstances for his son to be affiliated with the likes of Hazel, as after all she was his butler's daughter, and it didn't do to have a relationship with a servant. Hazel did not come from the same upper-class background as he did. Ascot Owen's father, when learning about his son's adoration and extreme devotion to Hazel, he was less than enamoured about this. He told his son in no uncertain terms that he would be disinherited if he was to marry beneath his station. He was mortified his son had shown interest in a servant girl. You see, in the 1800s, you didn't marry beneath your station. It was considered very taboo back then. That, of course, changed after World War II. But before that, everyone knew their place in society, even here in America. Ascot did not care. He was so in love with Hazel, and could not envisage himself being with anybody else but her. He would write her love poems, and they would meet with each other in secret. But I'm quite sure his father was on to him. Ascot had described himself as a one-woman man, and he wrote a poem about it with the title, "Only One Woman Will Ever Have My Heart." He was willing to throw everything away for Hazel, so that they could be together, even if it meant he would become working class and bale out hay for a living. As long as he could be with Hazel, that was all that mattered to Ascot. It would seem Ascot Owen's father was livid. Absolutely incensed he was, with his son's obstinate refusal to date women that were from a suitable aristocratic background. He was saying Ascot did not fully appreciate all he'd done for him, and he was under no circumstances going to allow his son to humiliate him, as after all the family reputation was like gold dust to him, and it would be scandalous if rumour got out about his son's interaction with a servant girl. A day or so later, under an extraordinary set of rather bizarre circumstances, Hazel was nonchalantly crossing the road in town, and was mown down by a horse and carriage. It killed her instantly. It was deemed, of course, a tragic accident. But Ascot Owen did not believe that for a second. He ascertained his father was behind Hazel's tragic passing. He was never the same again. In his bereaved, tormented state, he built Ravenscroft for himself, and buried himself away in his Victorian mansion, until he died, a very aggrieved, depressed man, at the age of 82. "Goodness gracious, that is such a sad story," said my mother. As you can imagine, after hearing this startling conversation, all the pieces of the puzzle began to fit into place, and things began to make a whole lot of sense to me. I was glad to have been privy to overhearing Granny May's confession. I 100% believe her account. Granny may have been many things, but she was no liar. It certainly explained why me and my brother Hamish had not experienced any ghostly paranormal activity or visitations from the Victorian man, the original owner of Ravenscroft, Ascot Owen himself. He had probably happily crossed over to the other side, to reunite with his lost love. All this time his objectives towards us had not been remotely sinister. We had also falsely believed the big hairy monster that had peered at us through our bedroom window when we were last at Ravenscroft was obviously a well-meaning Bigfoot who had our interests at heart. Ever since me and my brother had come to Ravenscroft, Granny May had changed her eccentric ways. She was no longer weird or freaky like she used to be. One thing remained the same, though, and that was that Ravenscroft had been very oppressive as a mansion, with a very unsettling energy. By the sounds of things, Granny May meant to make some changes around the place, And if that was the case, things were definitely looking up. I decided that maybe living here would not be so terrible after all. But could you make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, I wondered. I wasn't entirely sure about that, but miracles can happen, and they did. In the weeks that followed, Ravenscroft underwent a miraculous metamorphosis that was so astonishing I could not for the life of me believe I was actually living in the same house. Granny May seemed resolutely determined to make the house welcoming and warm for us. She even let us choose the designs for our new bedrooms. There were workmen around the property for weeks on end, fixing up Ravenscroft. It's amazing what a coat of paint can do to a place. Gone was the formidable grey exterior, to be replaced by a crisp coat of pale pink paint. The interiors were all lightened, and with the help of a designer, my grandmother had all the rooms painted in pastel shades. It was almost impossible to believe, after all the intensive renovations to Ravenscroft and the redecorating of the property to suit our taste palettes better, that we were actually living in the same house. Thankfully, it still managed to maintain its historic integrity. Indeed, the renovation enhanced the house's history rather than diminished it. Granny May invited Pastor Paul Rodriguez to Ravenscroft to bless the property, so any residual negativity that was possibly left behind by the weight of Ascot Owen's obvious depression that the property seemed to have soaked up like a sponge would be lifted. After the blessing of the house, it really was miraculously transformed in ways I cannot even begin to describe. It became auspiciously light, airy, and invitingly warm. Me, my brother and mother settled happily into Ravenscroft, and living with Granny May became a pleasure, not a burden, that we had to overcome. The memories of how menacing Ravenscroft had been when we first arrived seemed to be long forgotten about, almost as if it had happened in another reality, another lifetime, or even a parallel universe, so to speak. My mother found a great job in town. She met a lovely man called Harold, who she was dating. I could observe a genuine glow in her face, which suggested that she liked Harold an awful lot. I was happy for her, as the man seemed nice enough. Not that he could ever replace my late father, of course. But I didn't want my mother to be alone for the rest of her life, because that would be sad. Me and my brother attended a really good school, where we made a plethora of new friends, but none of them were as special to us as Douglas Hughes. We were happy in our new lives, playing outside freely, climbing trees, riding bicycles, and I'm afraid to say I forgot about the ghost of Ascot Owen and the Bigfoot I'd seen on my arrival at Ravenscroft. I also began to forget my old life in Nevada, and I'm not sure if I actually missed it anymore, although I did miss Douglas Hughes very much, and remained in contact with him. It was on the summer holidays that Douglas Hughes came to stay with us at Ravenscroft. He had begged his parents to let him come, but he was reticent about coming to Ravenscroft after the grim things we had told him about the place. I mean, how keen would you be to go to a place where there's a resident ghost haunting you in your bedroom during the night, standing over your bed, watching you, or a hairy, massive monster peering at you through your bedroom window, or a grandmother who has in her possession a book of spells and is constantly brewing strange concoctions on the stovetop that smell pretty rancid and chanting incantations and spells all the time? How eager would you be to come to a grey Victorian sombre mansion that looked like something you would see on America's Most Haunted? Despite our previously rather disparaging revelations about Ravenscroft that we had shared with Douglas Hughes before we actually moved here, he was so keen to see us again that he put all those ugly reports behind him. When Douglas arrived at Ravenscroft, he was completely confounded, as the pale pink Victorian mansion looked spectacular under the soft light shadows of the early morning sun, and the prepossessing views over the sculptural mountains would almost certainly have melted the hardest of hearts. I remember he gave me and my brother a very perplexed look, and then he chuckled and said, "To think I believed all that nonsense you both spouted about this place. You were really good, the both of you. I believed you about the ghost, about the monster in the woods, and your Granny May being a witch. I'm such an idiot to believe all that. The woman is such a sweet old lady. You made all that stuff up, didn't you? so I'd feel sorry for you and encourage you to move in with me and my parents. You needn't have bothered. I wanted you to move in anyway. Whether Ravenscroft was haunted or not, I'd have wanted you to stay with us. I told you I always wanted to have brothers. We weren't exaggerating. We weren't making anything up, I assured him. You have no idea how spooky Ravenscroft was when we first moved here. But Granny May transformed the place, and all the stuff of her being a witch was actually true. It's just she's changed. She's become a Christian now. Everything's different now. Change the record, said Douglas. I don't believe the both of you. He gave us a cheeky, mischievous grin. You made everything up. I'm not stupid. Now are we going to play in the woods or not? Or are you going to tell me there's a monster hiding in there now? Since we'd come to Ravenscroft, we had not ventured into the woods on our own. My brother was genuinely reluctant to do so, because he still believed a monster resided in there. I, on the other hand, knew the monster was harmless. After all, it had saved Granny May's life. I guess me and my brother overcame our immediate fears, to humour our good friend Douglas. I mean, if we refused to play in the woods with him, it wouldn't be a cool thing to do. What kind of hosts would we be? He was a guest in our home, and we wanted to show him a great time. I'm not sure what games we actually played in the woods, but there were many of them. And it was when we were running down a narrow path through the trees that all three of us encountered a Bigfoot. He stood there with his hands stretched out, as if he was stopping us from coming any further. He spoke to us in words that miraculously were translated into our heads in English. Ha kinatala, monaki sasana tua, hila sopono. Don't come any further, if you know what's good for you. I'm guarding a portal here. You mustn't cross this threshold. It's dangerous. He pointed to the tree planted upside down in the ground, so its ragged roots were fully on display. Kilatinapa, hasa. That's my keep out sign, he told us. Never come down this path again. Do you understand? Douglas looked at the Bigfoot with wide eyes, as if he was completely unable to comprehend what he was seeing. My brother's face had visibly gone pale, because he recognized the Bigfoot as the monster at our window when we were little. Hinatilasa ha kosholona. Please don't be frightened of me. I'm not going to hurt you. I mean you well. That's why I urge you to leave. Follow the signs. When you see an upside-down tree, don't venture near that place, because that is my keep-out sign. We did just that. We never saw the Bigfoot again, but we absolutely knew he was out there watching us, and watching over the portal in the woods, of course, keeping his eyes on Ravenscroft. Needless to say, Douglas Hughes was bewildered by his incredulous encounter, as you would have expected. My goodness! We saw a Bigfoot! We saw a Bigfoot! He said excitedly. That's the monster you were talking about! Is that the monster? We told him it was. So the stories you told me about Ravenscroft were true then? They were true! Yes, they were true, I told him. But not any more. Ravenscroft has changed, and I think we're going to be very happy living here. And we certainly were. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.